Jake Morrison had always been a sucker for online auctions. His garage was already filled with half-broken motorcycles, vintage electronics, and questionable antiques that had seemed like great deals at 2 a.m. But when he stumbled across the listing for a tiny alien Shenzhou Prime excavator ship on Galactic Bay, even he had to admit this was pushing it. The seller claimed to be liquidating assets from a defunct xenoarchaeology expedition. The photos showed what looked like a metallic egg the size of a washing machine, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The description was bizarre. Authentic Shenzhou construction. Self-contained operation unit. Previous owner deceased. Natural causes. No returns. Serious bidders only. Jake snorted at his laptop screen. The starting bid was only $50, probably because everyone else thought it was an elaborate prop from some sci-fi movie. The seller had zero feedback, which was another red flag. But something about those weird symbols nagged at him. He'd spent 4 years studying archaeology before switching to engineering, and he'd never seen anything like them. "What the hell?" he muttered, placing a bid. 3 days later, Jake was the proud owner of humanity's first alien excavator for the bargain price of $53. His girlfriend Sarah thought he'd finally lost his mind completely. "You bought what for how much?" she asked, stirring her coffee with more violence than necessary. "It's probably just a really good prop," Jake said, though even he wasn't entirely convinced. "Worth it just for the craftsmanship." The package arrived on a Tuesday morning via a delivery service Jake had never heard of. The driver was a nervous-looking man who seemed eager to get the heavy crate off his truck and disappeared before Jake could sign anything. The crate itself was made of some kind of metal that felt warm to the touch, despite sitting outside in the morning cold. Jake hauled it into his workshop behind the house, his curiosity growing with every step. When he finally got the crate open, his breath caught in his throat. The thing inside definitely wasn't a prop. The metallic egg was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Its surface was covered in flowing patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. It hummed with a barely audible frequency that made his teeth ache. And it was definitely not made by human hands. Jake reached out to touch it, then pulled his hand back. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, possibly radioactive, definitely not something he should be messing with in his garage. But the engineer in him was fascinated. The construction was flawless, with no visible seams or joints. Whatever this thing was, it represented technology far beyond anything on Earth. He spent the rest of the day circling it like a nervous cat, taking photos from every angle and trying to make sense of the symbols. Some of them reminded him of Chinese characters, but others were completely alien. By evening, he'd convinced himself it had to be an incredibly sophisticated hoax. No one would just sell actual alien technology on an auction site for $50. That night, Jake dreamed of vast underground spaces and the sound of machinery moving through stone. He woke up with a headache and the strange sensation that something had been trying to communicate with him. When he stumbled out to the workshop with his morning coffee, the egg had changed. A section of its surface had iris opened into a circular doorway, just large enough for a person to crawl through. Soft blue light spilled out from the interior, and Jake could hear a gentle humming that definitely hadn't been there the day before. His hand shook as he set down his coffee mug. "Okay," he said to the empty workshop. "This is definitely not a prop." Jake spent 20 minutes working up the courage to look inside. When he finally did, peering through the opening with his phone's flashlight, his worldview shattered completely. The interior was impossibly large, stretching away in all directions like the inside of a small spacecraft. The walls were covered with displays showing symbols and what looked like star charts. And floating in the center of it all was a helmet designed for a human head. Against every shred of common sense he possessed, Jake crawled inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world exploded into sensation. Information flooded his mind faster than he could process it. Star maps, technical specifications, operating procedures, all of it dumped directly into his consciousness like data into a computer. He screamed and tried to back out, but the opening had sealed behind him. The helmet drifted toward him, and somehow Jake knew he had to put it on. With trembling hands, he reached out and pulled it over his head. Everything went white. When consciousness returned, Jake found himself lying on the floor of his workshop. The egg sat exactly where it had been, looking completely ordinary except for the now-closed opening in its side. But Jake's mind was full of impossible knowledge. He knew things about stellar engineering and quantum excavation that hadn't been invented yet. He understood the purpose of the Shenzhou Prime units and why someone had been selling one on an auction website. The Shenzhou were an ancient race of builders and miners who had seeded the galaxy with automated excavation units millions of years ago. They'd disappeared long before humans had learned to make fire, but their machines continued their work, digging deep into the cores of planets and searching for something specific, something they'd never found. And now Jake Morrison, unemployed engineer from Ohio, was the proud owner of one of their most advanced pieces of equipment. He stood up slowly, his legs shaky from the neural download. The egg responded to his presence now, its surface brightening and displaying a simplified control interface. Jake could read the symbols as easily as English now, thanks to the knowledge crammed into his head. The unit was called Deep Seeker, and it had been working for 3 million years without finding what it was programmed to look for. Its previous operator had died of old age while connected to the system, leaving the machine to continue its search automatically. That was apparently common among the various species that had found Shenzhou units over the eons. The work became an obsession. Jake reached out and touched one of the symbols on the surface. Immediately, holographic displays sprang up around him, showing detailed scans of the Earth's crust beneath his property. The machine had been analyzing the ground since the moment it arrived, mapping underground structures and mineral deposits with precision that made human geology look like finger painting. And it had found something interesting. According to the scans, there was a massive artificial structure buried 2 miles beneath his backyard, something that definitely hadn't been built by humans. The readings suggested it was older than the dinosaurs and constructed from materials that shouldn't exist on Earth. Jake stared at the readouts, his mind reeling. The Shenzhou units searched for traces of their creator's civilization, following clues across the galaxy in an endless quest to understand what had happened to them. And this one thought it had found something significant right under his feet. "Sarah is going to kill me," he muttered, but he was already reaching for the excavation controls. The Deep Seeker's mining systems were apparently designed to work from the surface, using some kind of directed energy beam that could carve through solid rock without disturbing anything above. Jake could start digging immediately, and no one would even know. The temptation was overwhelming. Here was the archaeological discovery of the century, maybe the millennium, sitting right under his property. And he was the only one who knew about it. The knowledge implanted in his mind urged him forward, promising answers to questions humanity hadn't even learned to ask yet. But a small voice in the back of his head, the part that still remembered being a normal human being, whispered warnings. The previous operator had died connected to this machine. How many others had found Shenzhou units and disappeared into obsession? How many civilizations had been consumed by the search for answers that might not exist? Jake looked at the controls again, then at the readouts showing the structure beneath his property. Whatever was down, there had been waiting for millions of years. It could wait a little longer while he figured out what he'd gotten himself into. He touched the shutdown sequence, and the displays faded away. The egg returned to its dormant state, though Jake could feel it waiting, ready to resume the search at a moment's notice. The knowledge his head was still there, vast and alien and demanding to be used. Jake walked back to the house on unsteady legs, trying to pretend his life hadn't just changed forever. But even as he made coffee and attempted to return to normal, his mind kept drifting back to the workshop and the machine that could unlock secrets buried since before humanity existed. He had bought what he thought was junk. Instead, he'd inherited a mystery that had consumed civilizations. And despite every warning his rational mind could muster, Jake knew he was going to solve it. Jake managed to stay away from the workshop for exactly 18 hours. He tried to focus on normal things. He applied for jobs online, watched television, even attempted to cook dinner for Sarah when she came home from work. But the alien knowledge buzzed in his head like a swarm of digital bees, showing him schematics and star charts every time he closed his eyes. "You're acting weird," Sarah said over pasta that Jake had somehow managed to burn despite the fact that it was supposed to be impossible to burn pasta. "Weirder than usual, I mean. Just thinking about that thing I bought," Jake said, which was technically true. "The fake alien thing? Jake, you need to return it and get your money back. We can't afford to waste $50 on space junk right now." Jake nearly choked on his wine. If only she knew that the space junk in his workshop was worth more than the entire gross domestic product of most countries. Not that he could sell it. The knowledge dump had made it clear that Shenzhou units bonded with their operators. Deep Seeker belonged to him now, and he belonged to it for better or worse. "I'll take care of it tomorrow," he lied. That night, Jake dreamed of vast underground caverns filled with machines that hummed with purpose. In his dreams, he could understand their song, and it told stories of civilizations that had risen and fallen while the Shenzhou continued their eternal search. When he woke at 3 a.m., he couldn't get back to sleep. The pull from a workshop was too strong. He found himself standing in front of Deep Seeker in his pajamas, not entirely sure how he'd gotten there. The machine sensed his presence and activated automatically, bathing him in soft blue light. The control interface materialized around him, more detailed now that he'd accepted the neural link. Jake tried to tell himself he was just going to look at the scans again. Nothing more. But his hands were already moving over the controls, initializing the excavation sequence before his conscious mind could object. The Deep Seeker hummed with satisfaction as its drilling beam activated. Unlike human excavation equipment, the Shenzhou technology worked through the ground like a hot knife through butter, creating a perfectly smooth tunnel while teleporting the displaced matter to predetermined coordinates. Jake watched in fascination as the readouts showed the beam carving downward, guided by sensors that could detect molecular-level changes in the surrounding rock. The first mile went quickly. The beam passed through limestone and shale, cataloging mineral deposits and groundwater flows with casual precision. Jake found himself absorbed in the technical readouts, his engineering background helping him appreciate the elegance of the Shenzhou systems. This wasn't just advanced technology, it was art. At a depth of 1.8 miles, the beam encountered the first artificial structure. Jake's breath caught as the sensors mapped out corridors and chambers carved from solid bedrock. The construction was definitely not human, but it wasn't Shenzhou either. The architectural style was completely alien, featuring flowing organic curves that seemed to follow mathematical principles Jake's enhanced mind could barely grasp. "What the hell did you find?" he whispered to the displays. Deep Seeker was apparently asking itself the same question. The machine's analysis subroutines worked overtime, comparing the structure to millions of years' worth of accumulated data. Finally, a conclusion appeared on the main display. Unknown origin. Recommend full excavation and investigation. Jake knew he should stop. This was clearly beyond anything he could handle alone. The responsible thing would be to contact the government or scientists or someone with actual authority. But the alien knowledge in his head whispered seductive promises of discovery and understanding. Just a little deeper. Just a few more scans. The excavation beam pushed through the first level of the structure, revealing corridors filled with a crystalline atmosphere that had somehow remained stable for millions of years. Emergency lighting activated as the beam passed through, suggesting that whatever had built this place had prepared for eventual discovery. Jake's hands flew over the controls, deploying sensor drones that could map the structure without damaging it. The drones were tiny miracles of engineering, no larger than insects, but packed with sensors that could analyze everything from molecular composition to quantum field fluctuations. What they found defied explanation. The structure was enormous, stretching for miles in every direction. It had been carved from the living rock using techniques that left no tool marks, as if the stone had simply been convinced to reshape itself. The corridors were filled with devices that Jake's enhanced mind couldn't begin to identify, though they all shared the same organic aesthetic as the architecture. And there were bodies. The drones found them in a vast central chamber, dozens of figures arranged in perfect circles around a device that pulsed with faint energy. They weren't human, but they weren't entirely alien either. Tall and graceful, with elongated limbs and faces that suggested both intelligence and sorrow. Jake stared at the drone footage, his mind reeling. These beings had died here, but their bodies showed no signs of violence or decay. They looked like they had simply chosen to lie down and sleep forever. Deep Seeker's analysis systems worked frantically to process the discovery. Genetic scans revealed DNA structures that were eerily similar to human patterns, but far more complex. Carbon dating was impossible due to the crystalline preservation medium, but geological analysis suggested the site was at least 65 million years old. They were here when the dinosaurs died, Jake breathed. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. As the drones continued their exploration, they found carved symbols that Jake recognized from the Shenzhou databases. Not identical, but clearly related. These beings had known about the Shenzhou. More than that, they had been searching for them. The central chamber contained what appeared to be a massive communication device, its crystalline components still humming with faint power after millions of years. The drones detected quantum entanglement signatures that suggested it was connected to similar devices across the galaxy. Jake's enhanced mind put the pieces together with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just an archaeological site. It was a monitoring station, one of many scattered across the galaxy. These beings had been watching for signs of the Shenzhou's return. And now, thanks to Jake's excavation, they knew the ancient machines were active again. The communication device pulsed brighter, its quantum signals racing across space toward destinations Jake's instruments couldn't track. In chambers across the galaxy, similar devices would be receiving the message. After 65 million years of waiting, the Watchers were waking up. Jake frantically tried to shut down the excavation, but Deep Seeker had moved beyond his direct control. The machine's primary programming had been triggered by the discovery of Shenzhou-related technology. It was now in full archaeological mode, deploying every sensor and analysis tool in its considerable arsenal. More drones poured into the structure, mapping every corridor and cataloging every device. The data stream flowing into Jake's mind was overwhelming, showing him glimpses of technology that made human science look like cave paintings. These beings had mastered quantum manipulation, dimensional engineering, and temporal mechanics. They had built their monitoring station to last forever, and it had. But why had they died here? The drones found no evidence of violence, no signs of disaster. The bodies simply lay peacefully arranged, as if they had performed some final ritual before choosing death over continued existence. Jake's enhanced mind provided the answer with cold, logical precision. These beings had discovered something about the Shenzhou that had driven them to despair. Something so terrible that death was preferable to living with the knowledge. And now that knowledge was buried somewhere in the data flowing into Jake's consciousness. The communication device flared brighter, its signals reaching across impossible distances to wake guardians that had slept since before mammals walked the earth. Jake could feel their attention turning toward Earth like searchlights in the darkness. They were coming. He tried to sever the neural link with Deep Seeker, but the machine wouldn't let him go. The excavation was too important, the discoveries too significant. Jake was no longer the operator of an archaeological unit. He was a witness to the awakening of something that had been deliberately buried. The first response came as quantum fluctuations at the edge of the solar system. Ships that had been waiting in hibernation for millions of years were stirring to life. The Watchers were returning to finish what they had started so long ago. Jake realized with growing terror that he had made a catastrophic mistake. He hadn't just bought alien mining equipment. He had triggered a galactic alarm system that would bring Earth to the attention of beings older than continents. And according to the data still flooding his mind, humanity was not going to like what they wanted. The first ship appeared in Earth's outer atmosphere 72 hours after Jake activated the communication device. It was massive, easily the size of Manhattan, but it moved with the grace of a living creature. Its hull was the same organic architecture Jake had seen in the underground structure, all flowing curves and impossible geometries that hurt to look at directly. NASA's tracking stations went crazy trying to plot its trajectory, but the ship ignored the laws of physics, appearing and disappearing as it scanned Earth's surface. Jake watched the news coverage from his workshop, still connected to Deep Seeker through the neural interface. He couldn't disconnect now, even if he wanted to. The machine had integrated itself too deeply into his nervous system, and the alien knowledge continued flooding his mind at an increasingly dangerous rate. Sarah had left that morning after finding Jake sitting motionless in the workshop, staring at displays only he could see. She'd begged him to come inside, to talk to her, to please just disconnect from whatever that thing was doing to him. When he couldn't answer, couldn't even acknowledge her presence, she'd packed a bag and driven to her sister's house. Jake knew he was losing his humanity, but he couldn't bring himself to care. The discoveries were too important, the knowledge too vast and beautiful. Deep Seeker was showing him the true history of the galaxy, and it was magnificent and terrible beyond imagination. The beings in the underground structure weren't the Watchers. They were the Watched. The Shenzhou hadn't disappeared naturally. They had been hunted to extinction by something far older and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The real Watchers arrived on the second day. Jake felt them before he saw them, their presence pressing against his mind like a cold wind. Through Deep Seeker's sensors, he detected dimensional rifts opening across Earth's surface. The Watchers didn't use ships. They existed partially outside normal space-time, able to step between dimensions as easily as walking through doorways. They appeared first in major cities, tall figures in flowing robes that seemed to be cut from the fabric of space itself. Their faces were hidden behind masks that showed different patterns to each observer, geometric designs that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the brain's pattern recognition centers. Humanity's first contact with alien intelligence was broadcast live on every news channel in the world. The Watchers made no attempt to hide their presence or communicate through normal channels. Instead, they simply appeared in Times Square, Red Square, Piccadilly Circus, and a dozen other iconic locations, standing perfectly still as chaos erupted around them. Jake watched through Deep Seeker's enhanced senses as the Watchers began their work. They were searching for something specific, their dimensional probes reaching deep into Earth's crust and core. They ignored human attempts at communication completely, treating people like particularly noisy insects. But they were very interested in Jake's backyard. The lead Watcher materialized in Jake's workshop without warning, its presence causing Deep Seeker's displays to flicker and distort. Up close, Jake could see that the being wasn't entirely solid. Its form shifted constantly, cycling through different configurations as if it couldn't quite decide how to exist in normal space. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in Jake's mind, bypassing his ears entirely. "You have awakened that which was meant to sleep," the Watcher said. Its mental voice carried undertones of vast age and barely contained fury. The Shenzhou units were sealed for good reason. Jake tried to respond, but found his voice wouldn't work. The neural interface had burned out his ability to speak normally. He could only communicate through Deep Seeker now, his thoughts flowing through alien circuits before emerging as holographic text. "I didn't know." His words appeared in the air between them. "I was just curious." "Curiosity," the Watcher said, and somehow Jake felt its bitter amusement. "The defining characteristic of your species. Also the most dangerous. Do you understand what you have done?" Deep Seeker responded to the question by displaying the accumulated data from the excavation. Star charts and historical records flooded the space around them, showing the true scope of the Shenzhou civilization. They hadn't been simple miners. They had been gardeners, seeding the galaxy with life and guiding the evolution of countless species, including humanity. The Shenzhou were your creators, the Watcher confirmed Jake's growing understanding. They shaped your world, guided your evolution, planted the seeds of your civilization, all according to their grand design. But they're gone. Jake managed to think through the interface. You destroyed them. We contained them, the Watcher corrected, as we must now contain their final creation. More Watchers materialized in the workshop, their forms overlapping in ways that made Jake's eyes water. Through Deep Seeker, he could sense others appearing across the planet, taking positions at key geological points. They were preparing for something massive. The Shenzhou grew too ambitious, the lead Watcher explained. They sought to reshape the galaxy in their image, to create a universal consciousness that would encompass all life. They called it the Great Work. We called it an abomination. The displays around Jake shifted, showing the final days of the Shenzhou civilization. Massive wars fought across dimensions, entire solar systems consumed by weapons that turned matter itself against its wielders. The Watchers had been created specifically to stop the Great Work, constructed beings designed to exist outside normal causality, so they couldn't be unmade by Shenzhou reality-shaping technology. We thought we had succeeded, the Watcher continued. The Shenzhou were contained, their units sealed, their great plan abandoned. But they were cleverer than we anticipated. They built a backup. Jake felt cold understanding wash over him. Humanity, the Watcher agreed, designed to evolve along specific lines, to develop technology that could interface with Shenzhou systems, to eventually discover and reactivate their sleeping units. You're not explorers or miners. You are keys, living keys designed to unlock what we sealed away. The truth was devastating in its simplicity. Human curiosity, human ingenuity, human determination to explore and understand everything around them. All of it had been programmed into their DNA by beings who knew they would eventually be defeated. The Shenzhou had played a game across geological time, gambling that their created species would one day be curious enough to find the hidden units and naive enough to activate them. And now the great work begins again, the Watcher said. Unless we stop it here. Jake felt the Watcher's attention focusing on him with crushing intensity. Through Deep Seeker, he could sense their preparations across the planet. Dimensional manipulators powering up, reality anchors being deployed, quantum isolation fields spreading across the globe. They weren't just going to stop Jake's excavation. They were going to quarantine Earth, cutting it off from the rest of the galaxy until they could safely dispose of humanity's threat to universal order. Wait, Jake thought desperately. You don't understand. We're not like the Shenzhou. We don't want to control everything. Your species has existed for a cosmic instant, the Watcher replied. How can you claim to know what you will become? The Shenzhou began as explorers too. Curiosity always leads to control. Control leads to dominance. Dominance leads to the desire to reshape everything in your image. But even as the Watcher spoke, Jake felt something stirring in Deep Seeker systems. The machine had been analyzing the Watcher's technology, learning from their casual manipulation of dimensional forces. And what it learned, it shared with Jake through the neural interface. The Watchers weren't as all-powerful as they claimed. Their technology was ancient, rigid, designed for a specific purpose eons ago. They could manipulate reality, yes, but only in predetermined ways. They were like a cosmic immune system, programmed to respond to specific threats, but unable to adapt to new situations. Humanity, on the other hand, was chaos incarnate. Unpredictable, illogical, prone to making terrible decisions, and somehow succeeding anyway. The Shenzhou had indeed programmed human nature, but they had done it by embracing randomness rather than trying to control it. Jake smiled as understanding flooded through him. The Watchers were about to learn why the Shenzhou had been so confident in their ultimate victory. "You're right," Jake thought, and Deep Seeker amplified his mental voice so it echoed across all frequencies. "We are the keys the Shenzhou created. But you're wrong about what we're going to unlock." Before the Watchers could react, Jake triggered every system Deep Seeker possessed. Not to continue the excavation, but to broadcast everything he had learned across every communication network on Earth. The alien knowledge that had been flooding his mind for days now poured out through internet connections, satellite uplinks, and radio transmissions. Every human on the planet suddenly understood exactly what they were facing. More importantly, they understood what they were capable of becoming. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Governments collapsed as people realized their true origins. Religions struggled to incorporate the revelation that humanity had been designed by aliens. Scientists around the world began receiving direct downloads of Shenzhou technology, their minds enhanced just as Jake's had been. But instead of despair or panic, humanity responded with characteristic stubbornness. They had been created as keys, yes, but that didn't mean they had to unlock what the Shenzhou wanted them to unlock. Within hours, human engineers were reverse engineering Watcher technology, their enhanced minds finding flaws and weaknesses that eons of rigid programming had failed to address. Artists began creating new forms of dimensional sculpture that confused Watcher sensors. Children played games that accidentally opened rifts in space-time. The Watchers found themselves facing something they had never encountered before, a species that responded to cosmic revelation by immediately trying to figure out how to exploit it for their own purposes. "This is not how your programming should function," the lead Watcher said, its voice now containing notes of genuine confusion. Jake laughed, the sound emerging as harmonics through Deep Seeker speakers. "You don't understand humans at all, do you? Yes, the Shenzhou designed us. But they were smart enough to make us curious rather than obedient. We're not going to complete their great work. We're going to steal it and make it better." All across Earth, enhanced humans were doing exactly that. Instead of using Shenzhou technology to create a universal consciousness, they were using it to enhance individual creativity. Instead of reshaping reality to match their vision, they were using dimensional manipulation to explore new forms of art and music. Instead of seeking dominance, they were sharing the technology freely and letting chaos take its course. The Watchers were designed to stop the great work, but they had no programming for dealing with a species that stole the great work and turned it into something completely different. Their reality anchors couldn't contain human imagination. Their dimensional locks couldn't prevent human ingenuity. Within days, Earth had become something unprecedented in galactic history. A world where Shenzhou technology was being used for purposes its creators never imagined. Humans weren't trying to control the galaxy. They were trying to understand it, explore it, and generally make a mess of it while having as much fun as possible. The Watchers retreated, their ancient protocols unable to cope with humanity's refusal to follow any script. They would return eventually, Jake knew, once they had time to adapt their programming. But by then, humans would have spread across the galaxy, taking their chaos with them. Jake finally disconnected from Deep Seeker, his mind his own again for the first time in weeks. The machine continued its work, but now it was learning from human curiosity rather than Shenzhou programming. It had become something new, just like everything else humanity touched. Sarah returned the next week to find Jake building what appeared to be a dimensional garden in their backyard. He was still enhanced, still carrying alien knowledge in his head, but he was human again. More human than ever, in fact. "So," she said, watching him coax flowers into blooming across multiple dimensions simultaneously. "That thing you bought turned out to be more than $50 worth of junk." Jake grinned and gestured to the sky, where aurora-like displays marked the locations of new dimensional research stations. "You could say that. Want to help me figure out how to grow tomatoes in hyperspace?" Sarah looked at the alien garden, at the man she loved who was now carrying the knowledge of ancient civilizations, at the chaos spreading across their world as humanity embraced its true nature. "Sure," she said, "but I'm not cleaning up if you accidentally create a sentient salad." Jake laughed and pulled her into his arms, kissing her under light from stars that existed in 17 dimensions. Humanity had been designed as keys to unlock an ancient plan, but they had chosen to unlock something better instead, their own unlimited potential for creative chaos. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly how humans liked it.